Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals, March 28, 2018 meeting. If you would, I apologize up front for my voice, so I'm going to have some folks help me through this. So the first order of business is the consideration of the minutes for the regular meeting of February 28, 18. Is there any changes or amendments to those minutes? No. If not, I will approve as submitted. The first item of new business, and Maureen, I'm going to let you describe the first variance request, if you don't mind.
Of course. It's application Z18-012 by Roger and Kimberly Hopkins, requesting 3 variances from the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, Chart 2, to construct a residence and an attached carport. The property is zoned single-family residential, RS4, and is also located in the City Core overlay. It's located at 630 East Vine Street. The first request is a 7-foot setback variance from the required 15-foot front setback along Hancock Street. The second request is for a 9-foot setback variance from the required 20-foot rear setback. And the third request is a lot coverage variance from the required maximum of 40% to allow 44% lot coverage. That is what the request is. So I will go ahead and describe basically what the purpose of the request is. So in this particular zoning district, the City Core overlay, it does allow for the front setback along street frontages to have the house be located as close as 15 feet or whatever the adjoining parcel is, what that setback of an existing residence that's next door. So in both cases, along Vine Street and Hancock Street, along this property, the existing adjoining parcels, their structures are 15 feet back from the right-of-way. Mr. Hancock is going to be able to maintain the 15-foot setback along Vine Street, which is where the house would be fronting, and then along Hancock Street is proposing to reduce that setback, asking for a 7-foot variance. There is an existing driveway on this property where they had a detached garage. Mr. Hancock will be constructing an attached carport and constructing a new driveway encroachment where he would have to get an encroachment permit from the city. But with that attached carport, it is going to be encroaching into the rear setback of the property as well. And so he's asking for a variance for that portion. Overall lot coverage that's allowed in the zoning district is 40%. And so with the two uses, the structure is going to be at 44%. So he's requesting a variance to allow for that additional area to be covered. The reason for the request is that the parcel is kind of narrow. It's fairly narrow in its shape. It is a 4,000 square foot lot, so it is a lot that's consistent for the zoning district. But many of the other lots are a little bit more square in shape, where this one's long and narrow. And with the 2 street frontages, it really minimizes the amount of buildable envelope on the site. So staff has put together the findings that Mr. Hopkins has proposed in his attached letter, and those are the 3 requests. They would require a separate motion from the board for each one. Thank you.
Any questions from the board for Ms. Rush? If not, Mr. Hopkins, would you like to make any statement prior to us opening the public hearing? Looks like there's a lot of folks here that want to talk about it.
Oh, okay. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Rush did a great job in describing this. This is a very old house that was in terrible condition that we demolished, and you see the lot and what we're trying to do. We're trying to build a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home on that. Interestingly, the old garage was on both the rear lot line and the side lot line, so we demolished that. So I think we're going to have something that's going to be very, very nice there, and something that we can all be proud of there at the entrance of that old community.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. Any questions from the board for Mr. Hopkins? If none, I will go ahead and open the public hearing, seeking anyone that would like to say that may be for or against this application. Seeing no one coming up, I'll close the public hearing, and any discussion or vote or motion with respects to this application.
No further questions. I'll make a motion to approve the 7-foot setback variance. With any remarks from the staff?
I'll second.
With the motion and a second, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That first motion passes. The first part of that application passes, so we'll need a separate motion on the 9-foot setback variance.
If there's no discussion with regard to that, I will move to approve the 9-foot setback variance for the required rear yard setback.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The 9-foot setback variance is approved. And then number 3, the 44% lot coverage versus the 40% allowed.
With regard to this subsection, I was curious as to whether in the existing residence, whether because that garage is separate, it would not be included in that proportion, or is that?
Lot coverage includes all structures that would cover the property, so in this case, I actually don't know if the old one also was 44%, so I don't know if he's increasing the situation that was out there before or not, unfortunately.
Okay, you knew exactly where I was headed with that question, because it looks like it really doesn't change that much. It's just a relocation.
I agree.
I just thought I would ask.
All right. We have a motion or other discussion on number 3.
I'll make a motion to approve the 44% lot coverage.
A second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Hopkins, your variance request has passed. Thank you. Item B has been removed by the applicant, so we'll move on to item C.
Great, thank you. The third item on the agenda today is the application Z18-009. I had it listed by Huddleston Steel Engineering representing Mr. Dan Cassidy. It's actually SEC Engineering that did the work, so I had a misprint on there. I do apologize. The request is for a landscape variance from the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which requires a minimum of a Type C landscape buffer, which is 15 foot wide, to allow for no landscaping for 60 linear feet. The property is zoned highway commercial and is located at 314 West Loki Avenue. As indicated before, this property is zoned highway commercial, and the zoning ordinance does require a landscape buffer between this zoning district and the adjoining residential zoning district. The property has a sinkhole located in the northeast corner of the parcel, where any vegetation that would be planted just would not survive. And so the applicant is requesting for the variance for that perimeter landscaping for just that area that would be in the sinkhole, which is about 60 linear feet. The rest of the property would comply with the landscape buffer as indicated. So there is a photograph on the screen that does show that particular area, and the applicant is here as well to answer any questions the board may have.
Any questions for Ms. Rush? If not, would the applicant like to speak to the application prior to the public hearing? Okay. If not, we will go ahead and open the public hearing. Anyone here that would like to speak for or against this application? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing, and any discussion or motion on behalf of the board. So I have a question. So this is next to RS-15, correct? Or is RS, what, it's residential, single-family, whatever it is, correct?
It's RM16,
RM, okay.
which is multifamily residential.
So is there a fence here, or is it just going to be an open area?
I do have a photograph of the area. To be honest, I couldn't see if there was a fence or not. It does not look like that on the site plan. It looks like the site plan is just landscaping along the rear. I do not see any notes about a fence being installed.
So, if you don't mind coming on up, is the vegetation that was in that picture going to stay, or is it going to go? Or?
So there actually is an existing fence along the lot line. It's just an old barbed wire fence.
Yeah.
It's just very hard to tell because the vegetation is so thick back there. But the existing trees are going to remain. We're just going to add 12 foot of landscape buffer on the west side. And then the east side, we're just not going to touch it because the landscape can't go in the sinkhole. So the vegetation that separates our property boundary, the existing vegetation, from the north property boundary will still stay there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the property, this tree line is on your property?
The tree line is actually, it's on the property line, and then some existing trees are on our property as well.
They're, okay, they're not on the other property.
Well, I'm sure there's some on their property as well. I mean, it's kind of thick through there. You couldn't walk through it.
So those trees would remain.
Yeah, all existing vegetation in the rear along the property line will stay, in addition to the 12-foot landscaping that we will be adding to our property.
I guess if those are on your property, wouldn't they be in the sinkhole?
No, well, I mean, the existing trees around the sinkhole will still stay there, but we just can't add anything to it. There is a throat on the right-hand side of the property that has no vegetation in it. It's an open hole throat with a rock, a rock throat for the sinkhole.
Could you place a privacy fence on top of that?
No, we could not. We're placing a privacy fence on the east side, but on the north side, we would not be, because we're utilizing the sinkhole as a drainage feature to relieve the stormwater off of the proposed parking that we are doing. So we would need water to drain to the sinkhole, and any obstruction to the sinkhole would hinder that.
Wouldn't the fence be on the other side of the sinkhole? It would be on the property line?
The privacy fence?
Yeah.
I mean, we could try to do one in between the curb line and the sinkhole, but even then, we've got curb cuts for water drainage that's draining from the curb to that sinkhole.
So I guess what I'm trying to figure out in this picture, if this vegetation is where the sinkhole actually is, or are we even looking at a picture where the sinkhole is?
Yeah, so if you look at so right there at the corner of the property, on the property line, is where the sinkhole is, in the northeast corner, right there where the white word site is pointing to. That's essentially where the sinkhole is. It's actually a little further up on the property line.
Okay.
I guess my concern is that it sounds like the vegetation isn't on your property, and the point of this is to have commercial, to have some protection from people in a residential area from commercial activity. And if there's no vegetation on your property and there's no privacy fence on your property, there's no protection for the citizens that are living next to your property. And so I have some concerns with where exactly the sinkhole is. If you're saying that there's vegetation on the property line and the sinkhole's on the property line, and you can't put vegetation on the sinkhole, I just don't. I'm a little confused about what you're trying to say, because it sounds like you don't want to put anything there because of the sinkhole, but you're also telling us that there is vegetation there.
There's trees surrounding the sinkhole, but for the landscape buffer that we're required to do, it's 12 feet in width, over 60 feet, and we would be required to add additional landscape planting plants along that entire 12 feet and 60 foot long. With the existing trees there, they're large trees and bushes. They're not planting trees or planting bushes that we would actually plant. So they would stay there in the existing condition that they're in. But we just could not add landscaping bushes to the sinkhole because then we're clogging the sinkhole up and the water would not be allowed to drain anywhere because it's actually draining the back of the site now. It's actually receiving water, stormwater. It's acting as a stormwater relief.
So is it a sinkhole or a drainage?
It's a sinkhole. It's a natural occurring sinkhole, and the water is being drained to the sinkhole, and it's through the state. We applied for a UIC permit, an underground injection well permit, and the water is being distributed through the subsurface storage, through the natural subsurface storage.
And why wouldn't you be able to build a fence on the other side of that sinkhole?
On the other side, like on the north side?
On your property line?
On my property line, if I build a fence on our property line in between the sinkhole and the back of the curb, we're impeding the flow of water off of the parking lot that we're going to be adding. So the water would not be able to get to the sinkhole if we put a fence there.
So the sinkhole's not on your property?
It's on a combination in between our property and the property to the north of us. It's right on the property line. So it's essentially a natural depression in the ground that both properties are draining to.
So the only place that, I think I understand what you're saying, the only place that you could even put a fence, you can't put a fence on your side of the sinkhole because it would impede the water to go to the sinkhole. And the sinkhole is in an area that if you put a fence on the other side of the sinkhole, you're on somebody else's property at that point. Is that what you're trying to tell us?
Exactly.
Okay.
If you look at the landscaping plan, that's probably the best view you can see it from. We don't actually have an outline of the sinkhole, the full extent of the sinkhole. We have the contours, and we're utilizing the 527 contour and 526, I believe, as the limits of the sinkhole because that's where the water is going to build up to, and then from there it will sheet flow back on itself. It'll build up, but that is the low-lying depression area of those two contours.
So with the sinkhole there, with the thought process, you all are using it to drain the water through, the likelihood of that, the vegetation around the sinkhole that's there currently going away is probably slim to none.
Yeah, so the existing vegetation is not blocking the throat, it's just around it.
Right.
So, that's going to stay there. It's always going to be there as far as we're concerned. 'Cause
Right.
we just can't do anything with it. And then as far as adding additional landscaping, that would require us to actually clog the throat, which we can't fill that in.
Right. So, Ms. Rush, I'm assuming that the engineering department would be in agreement with SEC in reference to not obstructing and not doing anything to this area, so, since they are going to use the sinkhole as the water runoff.
Yeah, staff reviewed this particular request, and they didn't have any objections to the way it's proposed and designed,
Okay.
as well as the urban environmental looked at it. So if the board is thinking of making any requirements like fencing or changes, engineering will need to review that before they could be imposed.
Okay.
Just to make sure that nothing would happen.
All right, any other comments or questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions for staff or motions? So I'll kind of ask my question again. So really, staff, the city has no issue with the fact that there is not going to continue this buffer and the fact that the existing buffer would stay as is.
Yeah, this was a recommendation from the planning staff after going through site plan review approval process, because they were looking at it in terms of the parking lot expansion that's being requested, and that's where these conditions for landscaping come up. And once they reviewed the conditions of the site, they were asked to come forward to the BZA to get a variance request process.
So in other words, they've already approved it?
No, I don't think they've approved the site plan approval until this step has to take place first.
Okay.
So we probably need to make a motion either for or against the application. What happens if there's no motion?
It dies.
Okay.
Doesn't pass.
I guess my main, and you know, maybe engineering would be able to help me with this, but I feel like, you know, would there be some way for there to be a fence, you know, around the parking lot with drainage accommodations, or some way to accommodate the fact that we're abutting a residential property?
I think engineering staff would have to look at it. As the applicant pretty clearly described, the sinkhole is on his property and on the neighbor's property, so it kind of crosses, the property line bisects it basically. So to do a fence, the fence either has to be off-site and goes onto the neighbor's property, and you have to, I don't know what arrangements would need to happen, but for him to do it in front of his site, in front of the sinkhole, it would actually have the potential of impeding with the water drainage. So that would be something that engineering would have to look at. You know, what type of fence is proposed, where is it located, and what it will serve. And so I don't have those answers for you.
And we would be willing to add a fence, but the only fence that would be viable would be an open fence, you know, a metal fence or something that would allow the water to go through it, but then you're not, you know, creating that separation in between the multifamily and the commercial lot. I guess a site visit would be the best thing, because the existing trees that are still there is still blocking the view from the multifamily houses to the north and to the east. I mean, the existing trees themselves are a natural buffer. You can't see the house, even if you're on the lot now, you can't see the house that's behind us, and we're not taking out any of the existing trees right there.
Another thought, just to offer, it does abut multifamily, but there's no multifamily there now, and it's vacant. So if they do their process without the landscaping, multifamily would come in seeing that and accommodating it, probably in the future, is with their landscaping buffer, if they were to have it. And the other thing, this is just off Memorial. I mean, there's a liquor store to one side and small shopping center in Old Charlie. So, I mean, multifamily may go in there, but it's going to be multifamily that's going to be accommodating all of that already.
Did you say it's not a multifamily there?
No, it's
Vacant.
like it's single family. It's some of the properties that line Maple Street over there, which are older, single story now. I think it's just zone multifamily in the future, but just for reference, if you know where O'Charlie's restaurant is, it's just south of that, towards Loki. There's McGregor's Wine and Liquors right on the corner of Loki and Memorial. And the applicant's property is just to the east of that liquor store. I guess that's a long way of saying if multifamily goes in there, you know, they're going to see what's all there, and if they want to buffer, they'll have to buffer all of that anyway. And so buffering this 60-foot section as they build out that multifamily is something that probably could be accommodated in the future. whenever this turns to multifamily, if it does. It may never, it may stay this for quite some time.
I guess I didn't I thought that it was a multifamily already there, but they're not there.
Now, there's nothing, it's show that,
It's hard to tell whether there's something on the other side, how big
Yeah.
that lot is
That's
from this
all open.
picture.
it's all open area
I could try pulling it up on the,
that backs to that. And multifamily, if they were to do multifamily as a practical matter, they'd have to take out several lots. So I would imagine tucking multifamily there would be a real long-term proposition.
In that case, I'll make a motion to approve the application.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Sorry. Your application passes. Thank you. All right, we are moving on to letter D. Marina.
all right, this is our final item for the day. Application number Z18-011 by Mr. Aaron Blankenship of Old South Patriotic is requesting a special use permit to allow the operation of a temporary outdoor vending establishment for seasonal fireworks sales in accordance with the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance section 9.D.2 EEE. The property and that's proposed is at 231 Veterans Parkway, and it is zoned Highway Commercial Zoning District. This particular site had been used as a temporary seasonal fireworks sales for probably about 8 years in the past. It went away a couple years ago, and Mr. Blankenship is looking for a new location for his facility and is selecting or recommending that he could go to this one. So at 231 Veterans Parkway, the tent would be located 42 feet from the right-of-way. There is a curb that separates, I think I have that in the photo in the staff report, but there is a raised curb at the end of this particular paved area. The city is recommending a condition be placed on this special use permit for the barricades to be installed there so that nobody tries to drive over that or comes in through that particular area. All the requirements for temporary fireworks sales would be applicable, and Mr. Blankenship is here who can answer any questions if you wish.
So is the only way to access this site through that parking lot that's already there, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're not, one of the requirements is they can't take up a certain percentage of the parking lot stalls, existing stalls for retail centers. So in this case, he's on a paved area, which is required, but he's not taking out any of the parking stalls in order to put the tent in.
And there's no access to park in that empty lot to the left of this site, right?
Right.
Okay.
And those barricades are going to go on that street frontage, the
Correct.
end of that.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Rush? Does the applicant have anything to add to the application? Okay. With that, we will open up the public hearing for any that would like to speak for or against, and we're down to nobody. So we will close the public hearing and forward the board any questions or motions associated with this application.
No further questions, I'll make a motion to approve and add the conditions that are set by the staff.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Your application passes. We are at the end of our meeting agenda. Is there any other business that should come before this board?
No, we don't have any.
All right, we are adjourned.
So, Keely?